Okay, cool. So Duncan, thanks for that really insightful assessment and, again, sobering, excuse the pun, view of the market. So now let's talk about that duality. There's a carbon component around quantifying and substantiating those claims.
Mm-hmm.
So let's touch on that one, and then I want to come back to the
Sure.
sustainable development impacts piece. So on the carbon piece, and it may be counterintuitive to some folks, but I think you guys came out with a really interesting, I think it was commentary or it was a commentary or a piece very recently, where essentially, and I'm again, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but you, because of a data-driven approach, highlighted that some of the projects that maybe lack charisma, let's call them the ugly ducklings, happen to have a lot of super high integrity with regards to substantiating these claims. Can you unpack that for me? What are the types of methodology and project types that maybe aren't so charismatic and talked about, but have significant impact from a climate perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a great topic, and this concept of, hey, we need to look at those less charismatic projects came up as we started racking up the numbers. So we launched our platform with 50 projects rated on there, and we're today somewhere between 450 and 500. So
wow, that is a very rapid rise.
And as the numbers started rising, we're like, hey, there's and remember, we exist to try and push the market in the direction of higher quality, more impact. And we started saying, hey, in these higher ratings, which in our system is like an A plus and an A, and a little bit below that, we started seeing projects that aren't the typical ones that everybody is aware of, like some of the red projects or some of the renewable energy projects that have a lot of tons out there.
And have dominated the supply quotient, absolutely.
Exactly. For a while, that was more than 2/3 of what was being traded. But we started seeing landfill gas capture, ozone depleting substances, biogas, biodigesters, that type of stuff.
They're not that sexy, but they have impact.
A little bit more challenging to put in your sustainable development report.
I had this exact same conversation with an enterprise client recently.
Of what they do of actually standing for a claim of 1 ton of reduced or removed carbon emissions or its equivalent, they actually do really well.
Yeah. So the carbon score and this is unimpeachable.
Exactly. So in our system, so we rate credits on a scale of A plus to E. We assess them along the dimensions that you would expect. So additionality, and then a couple of over-crediting related dimensions, which is to do with the baseline, the risk of leakage, the risk of emissions of the project itself, and permanence, and the risk of overlapping claims.
Yeah.
But on that, they were doing really well. And so we felt it was necessary to say, hey, people, the market is more than those couple of project types that everybody trades in. There are some unpolished gems here to be found. And anecdotally, I'm hearing that some of those projects are getting a lot more interest than they used to.
They are.
And so I think that's a good thing.
I think it's a great thing. Yeah.
So those are
diamonds in the rough. The ugly ducklings, let's call them.
Yeah.
Mixed metaphors.
Yeah.
I like that. That's good because essentially, and many of those methodologies, like you said, are so robust in terms of the design. They're essentially unimpeachable, right? So you mentioned landfill gas, biogas digesters, etc. They're effectively displacing what would otherwise happen with waste products in the field, whatever it might be, through anaerobic digestion and putting up methane,
That's right.
but ultimately capturing that methane and ultimately using that for energy and essentially mitigating the climate impact. There's a multiplier effect of methane versus CO2. And we talk about CO2 equivalency. A lot of people talk about carbon, but it's CO2 equivalency. So that's the genesis there, and that's great for folks that understand it. It makes sense. It's good that you've put that spotlight on that segment of the market because it's a positive story, as opposed to the other kind of vitriol that keeps harping on in this marketplace around looking at it as an imperfect solution, and then therefore, like you said earlier, simulating or resulting with a perverse outcome of inaction.
And if I might add one thing, Rene,
please,
because I think you put your finger on something quite important here, which is there are really good stories there. Yeah. What we see though is that you can't say this type of project is all good and that's all bad.
Great.
There is no
nuance.
such thing as a type or a country or a standard
Mhm.
where you can say, well, there you can do everything blindly.
Great.
We've cut through our data because now with more than 450 projects in the data set, we start doing some interesting statistical analysis. We've cut through the data any which way. So we've looked at it obviously by project type,
Yep.
by country, by standard, whether it's CORSIA eligible or not. You name it, we've sliced it.
Yep.
But
So it's no longer an art, now it's a science.
yeah, and there is never a type where everything's good or everything's bad. There's always a distribution.
Statistic deviation.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you're a kid at school. There's a bell-shaped distribution, right?
There's a curve. And so what that tells you is it's important that the market has what is now available, which is project level assessment of risk that these credits don't represent, or if you want to flip it around, confidence that these projects represent that 1 ton claim.
Great. So many questions. So, okay, let's park that one for a second because you intimated this around baselines, overcrediting, etc. And then in that distribution, essentially worries around that overcrediting and that ton that's being sold not representing the 1 ton.
That's right.
You get that, and I don't think you'll see any pushback, certainly from me and other market practitioners on this. But there is an important topic that you touched on earlier around the sustainable development goals and the impacts associated with many of the projects. From a marketing piece, that feels good, right? It's a great story. But when you actually visit the projects on the ground, I've had the fortune to visit many of those projects on the ground in both Kenya and in Guatemala, and I've been to a number of other projects, and seeing the impacts that it has on indigenous communities, on local communities, on biodiversity. There's a lot, right? Let's talk about that component because you've also sliced and diced the data.
Yep.
What insights can you provide me on the SDG impacts of many of the projects that are essentially dual? They're carbon offset projects, but essentially they're masking as sustainable development goal impact projects, and they're looking for a currency, and carbon happens to be it.
I'm so delighted that you bring this up because I too have had a privilege of visiting some of these projects and being on a boat in the middle of a swamp forest and seeing the benefit brought to communities of a market-based system where people could actually productively work on something that is compatible with long-term forest health, those type of things. So that is super inspiring. We believe at Calyx, remember a little bit earlier I said we believe our mission is to increase the impact of carbon markets for the benefit of the planet and people. So we're really looking with as much attention and as much rigor at projects that make claims around, hey, we also do this for the community or that for biodiversity. And if you wish, the last or the blueprint along which it's easiest to evaluate that is to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, great. It's a great lens.
Those 17 goals. And what we basically do is we have a separate rating. So on the one hand, we have our greenhouse gas rating, and then we have an SDG rating, Sustainable Development Goal rating. And that one looks at the claims made by a project around specific the claims made, hey, I'm doing something for SDG 4, quality education, or SDG 1, no, zero hunger, or no poverty, or and so on and so on. And we look at the evidence brought forward. So when we rate those projects, we only do it when they have a certification for it. So you will have heard of TCB or SD Vista or Gold Standard for the Global Goals. And we look at, hey, they made a claim on SDG 2. What evidence are they bringing? And then we assess that claim around how much evidence of change is there? Is there just a story of, hey, we did some activity, like we planted fruit trees in the community? Or actually, do you see a story of real outcomes and impact in terms of that has led to the increased calorific value of the food in the community by X and a reduction of malnutrition by Y? And then we look at the quality of that evidence. Is it a story or is it time series of data? Based on those two dimensions, we can then start forming an opinion on and an assessment of, hey, the claim against that SDG, how strong is it?
How strong is that? Okay.
And then all those claims get added together in one SDG score for the project. And so we believe that those claims that the impact that some of these projects have deserve to be assessed with the same analytical and data-based rigor, so that indeed those projects that do the most get fully rewarded for it, because it costs the project extra money to do this.
Great, I'm so glad
And
you
if
said
you
that.
and if you're not going to be recognized for it, why would you go the extra mile? So what we want to make sure is those people who do go the extra mile, those projects that do go the extra mile and really do something together with the community that has long-term impact that can
That
last.
have a basis spread to the upside from the benchmarks.
Exactly.
Great.
You got it.
I love that. That is so empowering, and recognizing the important work that a lot of people on the ground have and do. And so I think that's ultimately transformative. I've got a lot of questions about the specific rigor around how that's quantified. It leads into questions around the monitoring, reporting, verification, the MRV piece.
Sure.
So you mentioned there's this paradigm shift with regards to that data on geospatial data and a bunch of other metrics.
Yep.
But I'm curious as to how that's done on the SDG side. A lot of that would be very, very difficult to quantify, no?
It took us the effort of developing a ratings framework for this. We obviously rely on the ecosystem itself. When you apply for a certification under SD Vista or CCB or with Gold Standard, you're required to submit monitoring reports. You're required to do the homework. Now, what we look at is, in that homework, how solid is the data? How solid is the evidence? That's what we base our assessments on.
Okay.
So that's how it becomes a very mutually reinforcing ecosystem, where we use that data to then start drawing conclusions from it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So many questions for you.